Hi, I'm Bob Dunlap, and we're going to spend a few minutes talking about firing pin fit. Before we start talking about how they fit, or how they're supposed to fit and what they do, we need to talk about priming compound a little bit. Now, most of you will probably know what a primer is like, but for those of you who don't, a centerfire primer, a boxer primer that we're used to, the American-style primer, is a cup, usually of brass, and it goes into a hole. It's a tight fit. And in the bottom of that cup is a little wafer of priming compound. And then on top of that priming cup or disc of priming compound is what they call an anvil. It's the various shapes, but basically it sets at the edge of the primer cup and in the bottom of the primer pocket in the case, and becomes an anvil so that when the firing pin strikes the cup and pushes it inward, it pushes the little wafer of priming compound against the anvil and crushes it. What it does is it abrades it across it. It makes it move. Now, the priming compound simply burns. Oh, it explodes, Bob. Well, it burns real fast. An explosion is actually a very rapid burning in most cases. An atomic explosion isn't a burning, but most explosives burn. They just burn fast, and so we think they're terrible. Explosives aren't necessarily a bad thing, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, what happens is when you push the compound against the anvil and the incoming cup pushed by the primer, it abrades across itself. It moves across itself rapidly. When you move something like compressing air, you move a lot of molecules. They warm up from friction. Well, that's exactly what happens with the priming compound. You heat it up. When the primer strikes it and crushes against the anvil, you heat it up. A little experiment. If you take your hands, push them real hard to each other, against each other, and push them across each other like this, you'll feel some heat. If you do the exactly same thing but do it fast, you feel more heat. In reality, you generated about the same amount of heat. It's just that when you did it fast, there's less time for the heat to dissipate in your skin and your flesh, and so it feels hotter, built up. That's what happens. You crush the priming compound and you move it across itself rapidly enough that there's enough retained heat that it gets up to critical temperature and catches on fire. That critical temperature is about 300 degrees. It's not very hot. So the priming compound catches on fire, burns, and pushes itself, the fire, out through the flash hole in the primer cup or the primer pocket and sets the gunpowder on fire. In the early days, of course, priming compound was pretty bad stuff. It was also pretty touchy. Fulminate of mercury is generally what they used, and it went off with the slightest provocation. Many primer manufacturers lost, or should I say the workers, not necessarily the manufacturers, but the workers lost fingers and hands and lives with the fulminate of mercury going off. The mercury that was released when it went off ruined the brass cases in short order. It was not good stuff. It also had a tendency to be corrosive. They got away from it as soon as they could. They got something that wasn't quite as robust in its desire to catch on fire. And as primers continued to improve, they got them so they weren't quite so erosive or corrosive. But priming compounds, even into the 30s in this country, were corrosive. Now, when they got away from the fulminate of mercury and they got something that caught on fire a little harder, they had to put something in it to increase the friction, because the blow of the firing pin didn't create enough heat to set it on fire. What they had a tendency to do was they put in something that added friction. Not they had a tendency to do, they did it. But they had a tendency to use something that was pretty erosive, like glass or carborundum. Now, you can figure that you have your wonderful little barrel here, and you have this priming compound that has fine glass in it, or carborundum, or something else that's abrasive and hard. A little bit of that squirts out and gets in the bore and is carried into the bore with the burning powder and erodes your barrel. Now, Remington brought out clean bore priming, I believe, in the early 30s. I'm not sure on that because I didn't bother to look it up. It wasn't important. But they brought it out before my time anyway. And even when I was a kid, the boxes said clean bore priming, non-corrosive, non-erosive. Folks, that was a big deal. It really was. Now we had a priming compound that caught on fire pretty easily, didn't erode your barrel, didn't attract moisture and make the barrel rust after you shot a round or two. And that's why you see so many old guns with really bad barrels. It's because the priming compound was corrosive, did attract moisture, and the gun was not cleaned after it was shot. So we had this here problem. We've made great strides with priming compound, and that's the big one. Non-corrosive, non-erosive. I don't know if Remington invented it, but they were the first to come out with it in this country, and it is a big deal. But because the priming compound doesn't catch on fire as easily as it used to, we have to have a firing pin that does its job correctly. Now, when you discharge a round, the pressure builds up in the priming cup, in the primer pocket, and then in the cartridge case, and the pressure inside the case may well be 30,000, 40,000 pounds per square inch, and some of that pressure goes back through the flash hole and pushes on the priming cup. And if you have a sloppy fitting firing pin, it may flow back into the hole for the firing pin and spring a leak. Or if the firing pin is too long, it may pierce the cup and spring a leak. Or too pointed, it'll pierce the cup and spring a leak. Now, a leak can be kind of bad because if you're not wearing spectacles and you don't have a modern gun that has some kind of gas deflection system in it, and you're right there peeking here, the gas can come out and get you right there. And since it's hot and full of debris because you haven't cleaned your gun for 6 years, someone's going to go in your eye and it's going to give you the super eye bunger. You'll probably be blind. So it's important to have a firing pin that fits correctly. And there's a big difference in center fire and rim fire firing pins. So next month or the next couple of months, we'll talk about this type of firing pin or these types of firing pins and how they should fit. In the meantime, I try to understand what we've covered this month, and it'll be a little easier next month when we hit you up again. I'll talk to you later.